My sister gave me a DNA test at my birthday dinner to prove I wasn't a real member of the family, and everyone laughed. The joke was on her. When the results came back, I used my professional skills to uncover a 40-year-old secret that ended her mockery forever. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The box was wrapped in shimmering gold paper, topped with a ridiculously large, ostentatious bow that screamed my sister's name, Amelia. It sat on the polished mahogany of the restaurant table, a gleaming monument to her brand of performative generosity. Around me, my family's expectant faces glowed in the soft, ambient light. It was my 45th birthday, a milestone that felt less like a celebration and more like a public performance I was required to attend. I'd been feeling tired for weeks, a deep, bone-weary exhaustion that had finally prompted a doctor's visit. The preliminary tests had been inconclusive, but the word autoimmune had been whispered, leaving a low hum of anxiety beneath the surface of my days. "Well, go on, Louise," my mother, Eleanor, urged, her smile a little too bright. "Don't keep us in suspense." My father, Robert, gave a quiet nod of agreement, his gaze fixed on the gift. He was a man of few words, his approval a currency Amelia had always managed to corner the market on. I offered a weak smile and carefully peeled back the paper. Amelia leaned forward, her perfectly manicured nails tapping an impatient rhythm on her wine glass. She was a vision, as always, her blonde hair expertly highlighted, her dress a designer label I couldn't pronounce, her entire being radiating a kind of effortless superiority that had defined our relationship since childhood. I, on the other hand, felt like a faded photograph next to her vibrant print. My sensible dress, my practical haircut, my quiet profession as a genealogist, it all seemed to pale in comparison. Inside the box was another, sleeker box, branded with the logo of a popular DNA testing company. For a moment, confusion clouded my thoughts. It was an odd gift. I already knew my heritage, my family tree meticulously mapped out in charts and records. It was my life's work, after all. Amelia's smirk gave her away before she even spoke. "I thought it was time we finally settled the age-old family joke," she announced to the table, her voice dripping with mock sincerity. "You know, since you look so different from the rest of us, Lou, we can have a big reveal party when the results come in. It'll be fun." A few chuckles rippled around the table. The joke was as old as I was, my darker, wavier hair against their straight blonde locks, my olive skin that tanned easily while they turned pink, my quiet, scholarly nature in a family of extroverts. It had started as a childhood tease, but had morphed over the years into a subtle, persistent tool of exclusion, wielded primarily by Amelia. It was her way of reminding me that I was the outlier, the anomaly, the one who didn't quite belong. My mother's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes before it was plastered back in place. "Oh, Amelia, don't be silly," she chided gently, but there was no heat in her words. "I'm not being silly, Mom," Amelia countered, her eyes sparkling with mischief. "I'm just curious. Aren't you? Maybe the hospital made a little mix-up 45 years ago. We could find your real family, Louise." The laughter that followed was louder this time. It felt like a physical blow, winding me. I looked at my hands, resting on the white tablecloth, trying to keep them from trembling. The exhaustion I'd been carrying for weeks suddenly intensified, mingling with a profound and chilling wave of humiliation. They were all in on it. This wasn't a gift. It was a punchline, and I was the joke. I felt a strange sense of detachment, as if I were floating above the table, watching a scene from someone else's life. A woman, pale and tired, being gently mocked by the people who were supposed to love her most, all under the guise of celebration. I forced myself to meet Amelia's triumphant gaze. "Thank you, Amelia," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "That's very thoughtful." "Of course, anything for my big sister," she chirped, leaning back in her chair, the victor of a battle I hadn't even known we were fighting. I packed the kit away in my bag, the weight of it feeling impossibly heavy. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur of polite conversation and empty pleasantries. I nodded and smiled in all the right places, but my mind was elsewhere, replaying that moment over and over. The casual cruelty of it, the easy laughter of my parents, it carved out a hollow space inside my chest. Later that night, as I sat alone in my quiet apartment, the do. Seator's cautious words echoed in my ears, intertwining with my sister's mocking tone. I was facing a potential health crisis, feeling more vulnerable than I had in years, and my family's response was to turn my very identity into a spectacle for their amusement. The betrayal was worse than the diagnosis itself. The week following my birthday dinner was a study in quiet misery. The DNA kit sat on my kitchen counter, a constant, accusatory presence. Every time I walked past it, the memory of Amelia's smug face and my family's complicit laughter would rise, fresh and sharp. My fatigue had settled deeper into my bones, making the simplest tasks feel monumental. I went through the motions of my work, tracing lineages and connecting ancestral dots for clients. But my own history felt like a question mark Amelia had gleefully scrawled over. 2 days after the dinner, Amelia called. Her tone was breezy, as if nothing out of the ordinary had occurred. "Hey, Lou, just checking in. Have you spit in the tube yet?" she asked, a giggle in her voice. I closed my eyes, picturing her in her pristine, all-white office, overlooking the city skyline, probably closing a multi-million-dollar deal while finding a spare moment to poke at me. "I've been busy, Amelia," I said, my voice flat. "Oh, come on, don't be a party pooper. I've already started planning the reveal party. I'm thinking champagne and a big projector screen. We can put the results up for everyone to see." The casual cruelty of it still had the power to shock me. She wasn't just satisfied with the private humiliation, she wanted a public coronation of her superiority. "A party seems a bit much," I managed to say, my throat tightening. "Nonsense, it's the event of the season. Everyone is dying to know the truth. Just get it done, okay? The sooner you send it in, the sooner we can have our fun." Her choice of words, our fun, was like a twist of a knife. This was her entertainment, her soap opera, and I was the unwilling star. After we hung up, I slumped into a chair, the receiver still clutched in my hand. The exhaustion was so profound it felt like a heavy blanket, smothering me. My world had shrunk to the 4 walls of my apartment and the looming uncertainty of my health. In that moment of profound isolation, a strange sense of resolve began to crystallize. If Amelia wanted results, I would give her results. I would play her game, but I would play it on my own terms. That evening, I completed the test. The process felt sterile and impersonal, a stark contrast to the emotional turmoil it represented. As I sealed the vial and placed it in the prepaid mailer, a single thought echoed in my mind, a quiet whisper that would become my mantra over the next few weeks. But they had forgotten one crucial thing. They had forgotten who I was. I wasn't just quiet, bookish Louise. I was a genealogist. My entire career was built on uncovering secrets, on following faint threads back through time until they wove into a clear and undeniable truth. I navigated complex databases, deciphered faded documents, and understood the subtle language of DNA in a way they couldn't possibly comprehend. They saw my profession as a dusty, harmless hobby. They had no idea it had armed me with the exact skills needed to dismantle a lie. 2 weeks later, an email notification pinged on my laptop. "Your DNA results are in." My heart hammered against my ribs. For a moment, a wave of fear washed over me. What if Amelia was right? What if this test upended everything I thought I knew about myself? I took a deep breath, steadied my hands, and clicked the link. The dashboard loaded, a dizzying array of percentages and ancestral maps. I scrolled past the ethnicity estimates, my eyes searching for the section I knew was most important, DNA relatives. My hands were shaking as I clicked the tab. The page refreshed, and there at the top of the list were the names I expected to see. Amelia's sister. Eleanor mother. Robert father. A wave of relief so intense it made me dizzy washed over me. It was true. I belonged. Amelia's cruel joke was just that, a joke. But as my professional instincts kicked in, I looked closer at the data, at the numbers and percentages that told the real story. I examined the amount of shared DNA, measured in centimorgans. The number between my father and me was exactly where it should be. The number between my mother and me was also in the correct range. I was their daughter. Then, I looked at Amelia's profile. I clicked to see the comparison between us. Full siblings typically share around 2,500 centimorgans. The number on the screen was 1,750. It was a number that screamed one thing, a conclusion so immediate and shocking that I had to read it 3 times to be sure. Half-sister. My mind raced, trying to process the information. If we were half-sisters, we had to share one parent. The system had already matched me fully to both our mother and our father. I quickly ran. The comparison between Amelia and our parents. Her match to our mother, Eleanor, was perfect. But her match to Robert, the man she had idolized her entire life, the man whose approval she so desperately craved, it wasn't there. The system didn't list him as her father. It listed him as a close relative, likely an uncle. The screen glowed in the dim light of my office, illuminating a truth that had been buried for over 40 years. Amelia, the golden child, the one who was the perfect embodiment of our family, was the one who didn't fully belong. Her cruelest taunt, the joke she had wielded against me my entire life, was a projection of a truth she never knew. It was her story, not mine. The initial shock gave way to a cold, clear calm. The exhaustion I had been feeling seemed to recede, replaced by a surge of adrenaline. They had forgotten one crucial thing, and now it was time to remind them. Growing up, our family was a solar system with Amelia as the sun. Everything and everyone orbited her. My earliest memories are of her, 3 years my junior, effortlessly charming every adult in the room with a flash of her dimples and a toss of her blonde curls. I was the quiet moon, reflecting her light, always present but rarely the center of attention. When she won the lead in the school play, my parents bought a new video camera to document it. When I won the state-level history competition, I got a pat on the head and a quiet, "That's nice, dear." I never begrudged her the attention, not really. It was simply the state of things. What I did resent was the way she used her favored status as a weapon. She was a master of the backhanded compliment, the subtle dig wrapped in a sweet smile. "Oh, Louise, that dress is so brave of you," she'd say, her eyes scanning my outfit with feigned admiration. Or, "It's amazing how you don't care what anyone thinks of your little hobbies." My passion for history and genealogy was, in her world, a quaint and dusty eccentricity, something to be tolerated, even pitied. My parents, Eleanor and Robert, were her willing audience. They saw her ambition as drive, her arrogance as confidence. As a luxury real estate agent, Amelia was wildly successful. She dealt in multi-million-dollar properties, drove a sleek German car, and her life was a curated collection of expensive dinners and exotic vacations, all dutifully documented on social media. She was the family's success story, the one they bragged about to friends. I, on the other hand, had chosen a quieter path. After getting my degree in history, I found my calling in genealogy. I loved the puzzle of it, the detective work of piecing together lives from scraps of information, census records, birth certificates, forgotten letters. I ran a small but respected consultancy from my apartment, helping people find their roots. It was meaningful work that brought me deep satisfaction, but in my family's eyes, it was a little business, something that kept me occupied. I was the responsible one, the one who visited our parents every weekend, who remembered birthdays and anniversaries, who managed their doctor's appointments when their health began to fail. I had sacrificed promotions and opportunities to stay close to home, to be the reliable daughter. Amelia would breeze in for holidays, bearing extravagant gifts that absolved her of any real responsibility, and my parents would praise her for making the time in her busy schedule. The antagonist in my life wasn't just Amelia, it was the entire family dynamic she had so expertly cultivated. She was the star, and I was the stagehand, working silently in the wings to make sure her show went on without a hitch. The DNA test was merely her latest and most audacious production. As I stared at the results on my screen, the years of quiet resentment and swallowed frustrations coalesced into a single, sharp point of focus. The story the DNA told was not just about parentage, it was about a lifetime of deception. My mother, Alina, the gentle, soft-spoken woman I adored, had lied. She had lied to me, to my father, and most devastatingly, to Amelia for her entire life. I thought back to my childhood, searching for clues. I remembered my mother's occasional bouts of melancholy, her faraway looks when she thought no one was watching. I recalled a few hushed, tense arguments between my parents late at night, conversations that would cease the moment I entered the room. At the time, I had dismissed them as the normal friction of a long marriage. Now, they seemed like cracks in a carefully constructed facade. And then there was Amelia herself. Polished and perfect on the outside, but underneath I had always sensed a deep-seated insecurity. Her constant need for validation, her relentless drive to be the best, the most beautiful, the most successful, it wasn't just ambition. It was a desperate need to prove her worth, to solidify her place at the center of the family. Perhaps on some subconscious level, she had always felt the fracture in her own foundation. Her lifelong taunt that I didn't belong was, in the end, a classic case of projection. She was shouting her deepest fear at me. Her polished appearance suddenly seemed like armor. Her profession, selling beautiful but empty houses, felt symbolic. She created an illusion of home for others while the truth of her own was a lie. Her pointed comments about my different looks were not just random cruelty. They were a desperate attempt to create a narrative that explained away the nagging, unspoken questions in the back of her own mind. The true antagonist was the secret. It had warped our family, elevating one daughter and diminishing the other, forcing my mother into a lifetime of anxious vigilance and my father into a state of unknowing ignorance. Amelia was simply the product of that secret, its most vocal and damaging manifestation. Now, armed with the truth, I had the power to expose it all. Amelia had planned her party, her grand stage for my humiliation. She didn't know that I was about to rewrite the script, recast the roles, and direct a final act she would never see coming. The stagehand was about to take center stage. The shift from victim to strategist was not instantaneous. It began as a slow burn, a flicker of indignation that grew into a steady, determined flame. For the first few hours after discovering the truth, I simply sat in my office, the DNA results casting a cool, blue light on my face. The initial shock gave way to a profound sense of sorrow, for my father, who had been deceived, for Amelia, whose entire identity was a fabrication, and for my mother, who had carried this colossal secret alone for 42 years. But as the days passed and Amelia's cheerful, oblivious texts about her party preparations continued to pop up on my phone, found the perfect caterer, you're going to love the canapés. My sorrow began to harden into resolve. She wanted a spectacle. I would give her one, but it would be a spectacle of truth, not of humiliation. This would not be an act of revenge, I told myself, but an act of restoration. The lies had poisoned our family for decades, and the only antidote was a full, unvarnished dose of reality. This was the turning point. I stopped being the passive recipient of Amelia's cruelty and became the active architect of its undoing. My clever trap wasn't a trap at all, it was my work. It was genealogy. My first step was to treat this like any other case I would take on for a client. I opened a new file on my computer, naming it simply Family. I printed the DNA results, highlighting the key centimorgan counts and the list of unknown relatives who had matched with Amelia, but not with me. The database had flagged a man named M. Peterson as a potential first cousin to Amelia. This was my first thread. I dove into public records, my fingers flying across the keyboard with a familiar, practiced speed. I searched for Petersons who had lived in our hometown around the time Amelia was conceived. The search was broad at first, but I narrowed it down using geographic and age parameters. After hours of cross-referencing census data, old phone directories, and digitized yearbooks, I found him, Michael Peterson. He had graduated from high school 2 years ahead of my mother. A handsome, dark-haired boy with a confident smile, he looked nothing like my father. The next thread came from the attic of my parents' house. On my next weekend visit, while my mother was busy in the garden and my father was watching golf, I feigned an interest in finding old photo albums. "I was thinking of digitizing some of our old pictures, Mom," I said casually. Eleanor, pleased by my sudden nostalgic impulse, waved me towards the attic. Up in the dusty, silent space, surrounded by ghosts of holidays and childhoods past, I found what I was looking for. Tucked away in a small wooden chest was a collection of my mother's high school memorabilia. Among the report cards and felt pennants was her yearbook. I flipped through the pages, my heart pounding. And there he was, Michael Peterson. He had signed her yearbook, not with the casual well wishes of a classmate, but with a message that was far more intimate. "Eleanor, you're the brightest star in my sky. Don't ever forget the summer of '82. Yours always, Mike." The summer of '82. I did the math quickly. Amelia was born in the spring of '83. The pieces were clicking into place, forming a picture that was both clearer and more painful than I had imagined. My mother had a serious romance with this man before she married my father. But the timeline was tight. My parents were married in the fall of '82. This wasn't a teenage fling, it was an affair that had happened right at the beginning of their marriage. The investigation was no longer just about Amelia's parentage, it was about the very foundation of my parents' union. The trap wasn't just for Amelia anymore, it was for the secret itself. My final piece of irrefutable proof came from a source I hadn't expected. The DNA database showed that the M. Peterson relative had a public family tree linked to his profile. He was Michael Peterson's nephew. I took a chance and sent him a polite, carefully worded message, introducing myself as a genealogist working on a family history project and noting our shared DNA connection to his paternal line. He responded within a day. He was an amateur history buff himself and was happy to share information. His uncle, Michael, had passed away from a heart attack 5 years prior, but he spoke of him fondly. He mentioned that his uncle had often spoken of a great lost love from his youth, a woman named Eleanor, before he moved away and started his own family. He even attached a few old photos. In one of them, a young Michael Peterson was standing beside a classic car, his arm around a young woman with a familiar, wistful smile. It was my mother. I saved the photo to the family file. I now had the DNA evidence, the yearbook inscription, the timeline, and a photograph. The case was closed. All that remained was the presentation of my findings. Amelia's party was in 3 days. She had booked the private room at the same upscale restaurant where she'd given me the kit, a move of such breathtaking arrogance it almost made me laugh. My fatigue was still present, a dull ache in my joints, but it was now overshadowed by a powerful sense of clarity. I was no longer afraid. I was a genealogist with a story to tell, and for the first time in my life, I knew everyone was about to listen. Before the grand performance at Amelia's party, I knew I needed to conduct a smaller, more private test. I needed to see my mother's face when confronted, even subtly, with the past. I needed to gauge the depth of the denial I was up against. So, 2 days before the party, I went to my parents' house for dinner, armed with a single, carefully chosen photograph. The evening was typical. My father talked about his golf game, and my mother fretted over whether the roast was overcooked. Amelia called halfway through the meal, her voice bubbling with excitement about the final party arrangements, and my parents listened with rapt attention. I waited, biding my time, feeling like an actor in the wings waiting for my cue. After dinner, as I helped my mother clear the table, I pulled the photo from my purse. It was the one Michael Peterson's nephew had sent me, the picture of my young mother, radiant and smiling, with her arm linked through Michael's. "I found this while I was going through some old boxes," I said, my voice deliberately casual. "I was thinking of making a digital album for you and Dad. I don't recognize this man, though. Was he a friend from high school?" I handed her the photograph. The change was immediate and profound. The pleasant domestic warmth drained from her face, leaving behind a pale, brittle mask of shock. Her hand trembled as she took the picture, her knuckles white. She stared down at the image of her younger self, and for a moment, she looked old and incredibly fragile. "Where did you get this?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. She didn't look at me, her eyes were locked on the photo as if it were a ghost. "I told you in a box of old things," I lied smoothly. "So who is he?" Elinor swallowed hard, her composure crumbling. He was just a friend. It was a long time ago, Louise, it doesn't matter." She tried to hand the photo back to me, her movements jerky and panicked. "He seemed important," I pressed gently, not letting her off the hook. "The way he signed your yearbook, 'Yours always, Mike,' it sounded like more than a friendship." At the mention of the name, a flicker of pure terror crossed her face. This was the confirmation I needed. This wasn't a forgotten fling, it was a deeply buried, terrifying secret. "You read my yearbook?" she asked, her voice rising with a note of accusation. "You had no right to go through my private things." "I was just trying to organize them," I said, keeping my tone even. "Mom, why are you so upset? It was over 40 years ago." "Because it's the past," she snapped, her voice cracking. She shoved the photo back at me. "And it should stay there. Some things are better left buried. You don't understand." Her reaction was more telling than any confession. Her desperate lies, her immediate jump to anger, it was the classic response of someone protecting a long-held deception. She wasn't just hiding a secret from her husband and her daughter. She was hiding it from herself, refusing to acknowledge the truth of her own life. In that moment, my perception of my mother shattered. The gentle, slightly anxious woman I knew was also a person capable of a staggering, lifelong act of deceit. The quiet strength I had always admired in her was, in part, the strength required to maintain a lie of this magnitude. "Okay, Mom," I said softly, taking the photo and putting it back in my purse. "I'm sorry, I won't bring it up again." But we both knew that was a lie. The secret was no longer buried. It was here, between us, in the tense silence of the kitchen. She watched me, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and suspicion, as if seeing me for the first time. I was no longer just her quiet, dependable daughter. I was a threat. I drove home that night with a heavy heart. There was no triumph in watching my mother unravel, only a deep and aching sadness. But her reaction had solidified my resolve. The truth couldn't be reburied. This secret had cost my family too much already. It had created a false queen and a silent scapegoat. It had denied my father the truth and Amelia her own identity. My mother's fear was the price of her deception, but the rest of us had been paying the price without ever knowing why. Amelia's party was no longer just about exposing her cruelty. It was about liberating us all from the prison of my mother's past. The confrontation had happened, and the reveal was now inevitable. The final 48 hours before the party were a blur of nervous energy. My apartment, usually a sanctuary of calm, felt like a command center for a battle I was about to wage. The file on my laptop, now titled The Project, contained everything: the DNA analysis, the census records, the yearbook photos, the picture of Elinor and Michael, and a detailed timeline that left no room for ambiguity. It was a cold, factual account of a deeply emotional story. Amelia, oblivious, continued her barrage of texts. She sent a photo of the custom cake she'd ordered, decorated with a large, frosted question mark. "Isn't it perfect?" she texted, followed by a string of laughing emojis. Each message was like a splash of gasoline on the fire of my resolve. She was so blinded by her own arrogance, so certain of the outcome, that she couldn't see the cliff she was gleefully skipping towards. Her desperate need to prove me an outsider was about to backfire in the most spectacular way possible. I took the day of the party off from work, needing to center myself. The autoimmune symptoms, which had been a low hum of discomfort, flared up with the stress. A dull ache settled into my joints and a wave of fatigue washed over me. For a moment, I second-guessed myself. Was this worth it? The pain, the emotional turmoil, the inevitable implosion of my family? I sat at my desk, looking at the evidence I had compiled. it wasn't just about me anymore. It was about Robert, a good man who deserved the truth. It was even about Amelia, who, for all her cruelty, was living a lie she hadn't created. The thought of my father gave me strength. He was a quiet, steady presence in our lives, a man who valued honesty and integrity above all else. This secret was a betrayal of everything he stood for. He deserved to know. That afternoon, I faced a new, more powerful confrontation, though it was one that happened over the phone. My mother called, her voice strained and tight. "Louise," she began without any preamble. "About this party tonight, I don't think it's a good idea." "It's a little late to cancel, Mom. Amelia's had it planned for weeks," I replied calmly. "Please," she begged, and I could hear the desperation in her voice. "Just tell Amelia you don't want to do it. Tell her the results were inconclusive. Anything. This will only cause trouble." "What kind of trouble?" I asked, my voice even. There was a long pause. "Families have secrets, Louise. Sometimes, for good reason. You don't know the whole story. You don't know what it was like back then." "Then tell me," I offered, giving her one last chance. "Tell me the truth, and I won't have to." Another silence, thick with unspoken words and decades of fear. "I can't," she finally whispered. "Just please, don't do this to our family." Our family, she had said. But it wasn't a real family, not entirely. It was a carefully edited version with a crucial chapter ripped out. Her plea, meant to sway me, did the opposite. It was the final piece of evidence I needed, not of fact, but of motive. She was willing to let Amelia humiliate me, to let my father live in ignorance, to let the lie fester for the rest of our lives, all to protect herself. "I'll see you tonight, Mom," I said softly and hung up the phone. The spell was broken. For years, I had craved my mother's approval, had rearranged my life to earn her affection and praise. Now, I saw that her love was conditional, predicated on my willingness to remain in the shadows and keep her secret safe. Her desperate attempt to regain control, to push the truth back into the box, was the final confirmation I needed. The case was built, the stakes were higher than ever, and the path forward was clear. I spent the next few hours preparing. I organized my evidence onto a tablet, creating a simple, clear presentation. I chose my outfit with care, a simple, elegant dark blue dress. It was understated but professional. I wanted to look calm, credible, and in control. As I got ready to leave, I looked at myself in the mirror. The tired, defeated woman from my birthday dinner was gone. In her place was someone else, someone I barely recognized. Her eyes were clear, and her expression was firm with a resolve that felt like it had been forged in fire. Amelia thought she was the star of the show, but she had forgotten the most important rule of storytelling. The story isn't about the person who makes the most noise, it's about the person who holds the truth. The private room at the restaurant was exactly as Amelia had described it. Elegant, ostentatious, and filled with people who considered her the center of the universe. Aunts, uncles, and close family friends mingled, sipping champagne and nibbling on tiny, perfect appetizers. A large projector screen, currently dark, stood at the front of the room like a blank slate, waiting for my humiliation to be written upon it. My parents were already there. My father, Robert, greeted me with his usual quiet warmth, oblivious to the storm that was about to break. My mother, Eleanor, avoided my gaze, her face a pale, tight mask of anxiety. She looked as if she were walking to her own execution. And then there was Amelia, gliding through the room like royalty. She wore a shimmering red dress, a stark contrast to my muted blue. She kissed the air by my cheek, her smile wide and predatory. "So glad you could make it, sis," she whispered, her voice laced with triumphant glee. "Ready for the big reveal." I simply smiled. "I can't wait." We sat down to dinner, the conversation buzzing around me. I ate little, my focus entirely on the moments to come. Amelia, seated at the head of the table, held court, telling animated stories about her latest real estate conquest. She was soaking in the attention, savoring her impending victory. After dessert, she stood up, tapping her glass with a fork. A hush fell over the room. "Thank you all for coming," she began, beaming. As you know, for years we've had this little family joke about my dear sister, Louise. She gestured towards me with a theatrical flourish. We've always teased her about not quite fitting in. Well, tonight, thanks to the magic of science, we're finally going to get some answers. She held up her phone, which was connected to the projector. I asked Louise to send me a screenshot of her results, and I have them right here, ready to go. So, without further ado, let's find out who Louise really is. A smattering of anticipatory chuckles went through the room. My father smiled politely. My mother looked like she might faint. This was my moment. As Amelia's finger hovered over the button to project her screen, I spoke, my voice calm but clear, cutting through the silence. Actually, Amelia, that won't be necessary. All eyes swiveled to me. Amelia froze, her smile faltering. What do you mean? I stood up slowly, holding my tablet. I mean, you've been asking the wrong question all these years. The question isn't who I am. I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in. The question is, who are you? A confused murmur spread through the room. Amelia's face clouded over with irritation. What are you talking about, Louise? Don't ruin my party. This isn't your party, Amelia. It's yours and Mom's and Dad's, I said, my gaze sweeping across the three of them. I tapped my tablet, and the projector flickered to life, connected to my device, not hers. The first image that appeared was the DNA results page, showing two simple, devastating facts side by side. Louise and Robert, parent-child connection. Amelia and Robert, no parent-child connection found. A collective gasp went through the room. Amelia stared at the screen, her mouth opening and closing silently, like a fish out of water. My father's face went white with shock. He looked from the screen to my mother, and then to Amelia, his expression one of pure, wounded disbelief. The test you gave me was very illuminating, I continued, my voice steady, narrating the evidence as if I were presenting a case to a client. It confirmed I am 100% the daughter of Alina and Robert, but it also revealed that you, Amelia, are only my half-sister. You share a mother with me, but not a father. Amelia finally found her voice. That's a lie, she shrieked, her carefully constructed composure shattering. You faked this. You're trying to ruin my life. Am I said calmly and swiped to the next image. The page from my mother's high school yearbook, the intimate inscription from Michael Peterson clearly visible. Mom, do you remember Michael Peterson? The boy who called you the brightest star in his sky. My mother let out a small, strangled sob, her hands flying to her mouth. My father's gaze, now filled with a terrible, dawning horror, was fixed on her. The timeline was very specific. I went on, swiping again to show a calendar marking the sum. Of 1982, my parents' wedding date, and Amelia's birth date. He mentioned the summer of '82. You married Dad in the fall of '82. Amelia was born in the spring of '83. It seems your romance with Michael didn't quite end before your marriage began. Amelia was openly crying now, her mascara running down her face. No, stop it. For my final exhibit, I brought up the photo of our young mother with Michael Peterson. And this, I said, my voice softening with a note of pity, is your biological father, Amelia. The room was utterly silent, the only sound Amelia's ragged sobs and my mother's quiet, desperate weeping. The secret was out, laid bare not with malice, but with cold, irrefutable facts. In that moment of stunned silence, my father, Robert, finally moved. He pushed his chair back, the sound of it scraping against the floor unnaturally loud. He stood up, his face a gray, unreadable mask of betrayal. He looked at my mother, his wife of over 40 years, and in his eyes I saw the foundation of his world crumble into dust. He didn't say a word. He simply turned and walked out of the room. The final, triumphant action didn't come from me. It came from Amelia. Through her tears, a look of sudden, terrible clarity crossed her face. She turned to our mother, her expression no longer one of arrogance, but of raw, profound betrayal. "How could you?" she whispered, the words filled with a lifetime of unspoken questions finally answered. "How could you let me treat her like that my entire life, knowing this?" And with that, she too turned and ran from the room, leaving our mother to weep alone amidst the ruins of the world she had built on a lie. The aftermath of the party was not a celebration of victory, but a quiet, somber navigation of the wreckage. The family was fractured, the silence between us heavy with unspoken accusations and decades of deceit. My father moved into the guest room, his withdrawal a palpable presence in the house. He and my mother communicated only through terse, necessary exchanges. The comfortable, familiar rhythm of their long marriage was gone, replaced by a strained and painful quiet. Amelia disappeared for 2 weeks. She didn't answer her phone or respond to texts. I later found out she had checked into a wellness retreat, seeking refuge from an identity that had been shattered in a single evening. The golden child, the sun of our family's solar system, had been exposed as a satellite, orbiting a truth she never knew. Her entire life, her sense of self, had been predicated on a lie, and the revelation had sent her into a freefall. In the midst of this chaos, I found my role had irrevocably shifted. I was no longer the quiet observer. I became the reluctant mediator, the anchor in the storm. It was I who finally got Dad to talk, not about forgiveness, but about his pain. We sat in his study one evening, surrounded by the books and photos that chronicled a life he now saw as a partial fiction. "I'm not angry about the past, Louise," he said, his voice raspy with emotion. "People make mistakes. I'm angry about the 42 years of silence. Every family photo, every birthday, every holiday, it was all a performance. Your mother let me live a lie." It was also I who reached out to Alina. I found her sitting in the garden, listlessly pulling weeds, her face etched with a sorrow so deep it seemed to have aged her a decade. She finally told me the whole story, how she had been young, confused, and torn between 2 men. She had discovered she was pregnant just after marrying my father and had been too terrified to confess, hoping the secret would remain buried forever. "I thought I was protecting everyone," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I see now I was only protecting myself. I let Amelia build her world on that lie, and I let her hurt you with it because your existence, as Robert's true child, was a constant reminder of my secret. I am so sorry, Louise, for everything." Her confession didn't erase the decades of hurt, but it was a start. It was the first brick in rebuilding something new and more honest. When Amelia finally returned, she was changed. The brittle, arrogant shell was gone, replaced by a vulnerability I had never seen. She came to my apartment, her eyes red-rimmed and her usual impeccable makeup gone. "I owe you an apology," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "No, I owe you more than that. I spent my whole life making you feel like you didn't belong, because on some level I think I was terrified that I was the one who didn't. It's not an excuse. What I did to you was cruel and unforgivable." "It's not unforgivable, Amelia," I said, and to my own surprise, I meant it. Seeing her stripped of her armor, I felt not triumph but a strange, sad kinship. We were both victims of the same secret, just in different ways. The healing process was slow and painful. It involved family therapy sessions that were often raw and excruciating. My Ather eventually moved back into the master bedroom, not because he had entirely forgiven my mother, but because he had decided their shared history, even the flawed parts, was worth fighting for. Their relationship would never be the same, but it became something quieter, more honest, and perhaps, in its own way, stronger. Amelia, with my help, reached out to her biological father's family. She met her cousins, saw pictures of the father she never knew, and began to piece together the other half of her story. She started a new journey, one of self-discovery, untethered from the need for my parents' unconditional approval. Our relationship, once defined by rivalry and resentment, began to slowly transform into a tentative, genuine sisterhood. We started talking, really talking, for the first time in our lives. My own health began to improve. With the stress of the family secret finally lifted, the mysterious autoimmune symptoms subsided. It was as if my body, like my family, could finally begin to heal now that the poison of the lie was gone. I continued my work as a genealogist, but with a renewed sense of purpose. I had always known that truth mattered, but now I understood its power on a deeply personal level. The truth, even when painful, is the only thing that can truly set you free. Our family was not perfect, but it was finally real, and I, the quiet moon, had found my own light.